In front of me right now is a kelp farm. One of my favorite parts about this kelp farm is how expandable it is. You can see just in a few seconds, it's now 4 times as big as it was. The only requirement for this is, of course, all of the kelp goes into one hopper, and you can do whatever the heck you want with it. This one hopper is super important because it goes into a smoker that's actually attached to a crafter. This crafter, when 9 dried kelp is put into it, will make a dried kelp block. So this is essentially a dried kelp block farm. However, this is very problematic because that smoker actually has a stack of coal in it, and we need a renewable resource to keep this farm going on forever. So, now just before I forget, the way this kelp farm actually works is it has kelp growing off of the bricks, and when it grows 3 blocks tall, the piston will push it and all the above kelp is going to go into that hopper. This works because the observers are watching for when it's 3 blocks tall, and behind the observers is redstone placed in such a perfect way that whenever it detects change, all of the pistons are going to go off. Back to the main problem at hand, we need to find a renewable source, but in order to do that, we need to understand a bit more about how furnaces work. When a hopper is placed on top of the furnace, the item goes into the top slot of the furnace. When it's placed in the side, however, such as a fuel source, it goes into the bottom of the furnace and will get used. So all we need in our kelp farm is a source of fuel coming from the right side of the furnace. The source of fuel I decided to come up with is dried kelp blocks. If you don't know, when you put kelp into a smoker, it turns into dried kelp, and 9 dried kelp at a crafter turns into a dried kelp block, and that dried kelp block can actually be smelted into a furnace, into a blast furnace, smoker, whatever. Now the one issue with my design is it actually runs off of bone meal. If I grab bone meal from the creative menu and put it in this chest, then it will be constantly put into a dispenser, which will in turn bone meal the kelp, which makes it grow. And of course we have the same system with our other farm where we have an observer and a piston, you know, redstone on the back, all of that. All of this glass can be replaced with tough bricks as well. And then the kelp is going to flow right into the hoppers, where it will be smoked in the smoker and put into the other kelp farm. The first problem I'm going to tackle is how to make the bone meal renewable. Obviously, the simplest way to do this is just to create a mob farm. This mob farm I have in front of me, I honestly looked it up and it's like the first result or whatever that you need for just a simple mob farm. It's really easy to make. All you need is just a really big floating square and then a drop into... I used campfires for the drop down there because you don't actually need XP from this farm, you just need bone meal. And then I also built an item sorter so that way only the bones would get through. With this I attached a few hoppers to an auto crafter so it would turn the bones into bone meal, and now we have a renewable source of bone meal for our kelp farm. Now let's find a way to actually smelt this kelp so we can turn it into kelp blocks and fuel the other farm. In front of me are 5 potential candidates that I considered using for this kelp farm. The first one was bamboo planks, because you could use bamboo in a crafter and craft bamboo planks. This would be a pretty good one as it would be very efficient. Next is dried kelp block. This one goes without saying. Kelp is a really good source of fuel, but I actually did decide against this one. Next we have lecterns. I didn't know these could be put into fuel, which is what made me go to composters, which is actually what made me settle on beehives. We'll be using beehives today. In order to craft beehives, you need 6 planks and 3 honeycomb. Now, the good news about this is those planks can actually be replaced with bamboo planks, because bamboo is of course a renewable resource. And so are honeycombs. That's why I decided on beehives. The first step is of course to build a bamboo farm. That way we can make bamboo planks to turn into beehives that we can finally smelt. Now, this bamboo farm functions very similarly to my kelp farm. Observer on the top, when the bamboo grows 3 blocks, the piston will push it and it will be collected by a minecart system. This minecart system will then be put into a crafter, which will craft into bamboo blocks, and then the bamboo block will be crafted into 2 bamboo planks. Now that we have a renewable source of bamboo planks, it's time to start working on the honeycombs. A bee farm is actually surprisingly easy to make. In this demonstration, the glass here could be replaced with any block of your choosing. They don't need natural sunlight, they can be slaves forever. More importantly, the bees go out of their hives, collect pollen, go back into their hives, the hives get sheared, and then honeycombs fall into the grass blocks beneath, where it's collected by the minecart hopper. The back of this farm has a dispenser pointing into the beehive blocks. It's filled with shears, so that way it will shear the honeycombs and be put into the minecart hopper. And there's also comparators facing out of a block. Any block of your choosing will work. And glass blocks are unfortunately necessary in this instance, so the redstone can go up, down, all around. The wood block, I don't know how this works, but if you place a comparator in a similar fashion to as shown here, it can actually go through the block, which I didn't know, and I have no clue how this works. I'm not doing any research on that, but it works, and that's how you make the honeycomb part of this farm. Now the hard part comes in actually combining the two farms and attaching a crafter to it somewhere in the middle of this. See, you can't just look up a beehive farm on the internet and find a crafter because it's relatively new and nobody's actually made a tutorial on this, so everything that I'm doing now I had to actually come up with, so maybe it's not the most efficient ever, but I tried to make it as efficient as possible. I'll give you a basic rundown on how it works so you can build this farm in your own survival world. The system you're looking at right now has it so it disables planks whenever there is 3, 4, or 5 items in this. That way the honeycombs can fill it up, and then it will continue to put even more bamboo planks once it's full, thus creating a beehive. The way it works is when there's 3 redstone output, 3, 4, or 5, it'll actually put a redstone input into this block right here, which will disable the hopper. However, the second there are 6 items in there, it disables the disabling part, and you can continue putting planks in, and this cycle will go over and over again. The issue with the system is it relies on a constant flow of bamboo planks. If there's more honeycomb than there are bamboo planks, then it's going to mess up the crafter and everything's going to go wrong. So we have to find a way to limit the honeycomb so that the bamboo plank input doesn't get interrupted. My method for doing this is wrong. It's so unbelievably wrong, but it's functional, effective, and it works. There's definitely a better way to do this, but I don't know it. And you're watching a tutorial, so you probably don't know it either. Now, what I did here is I have a constant redstone signal being put into one hopper with the honeycomb in it. What this will do is it makes it so every now and then only one honeycomb can get through, that way the farm doesn't break. And you have to find the perfect interval to make this function. Any more, any less, and it will be wrong. With 8 repeaters all at full length and a very specific method being shown here, if you break the redstone and place it at the exact moment, you can see that there is one pulse that will disable the hopper, allowing a single honeycomb to get through whenever this occurs. And it's at the perfect interval that it doesn't break the farm and is the most efficient it possibly can be. Make sure you test it as well, because sometimes it looks like it's really functional, but then it doesn't. Put however many blocks you need in, and as long as one block gets through every time the cycle continues, that means you've done it right. The crafter with the beehives is then inputted into a chest that connects to hoppers, that connects to dispensers. The kelp farm has a way for it to be smelted, and now we have dried kelp. Actually, the more I look at this, the more I think this could be optimized just a teeny bit if we move a few of the dispensers. That is much better. So now the beehives are going to be inputted into the furnace, so it will finally smelt the kelp, which will turn it into dried kelp blocks, which can fuel our kelp farm, turning it into dried kelp, turning it into dried kelp blocks, and now we have a sustainable dried kelp farm. The last thing to do now is just absolutely fill it with ingredients to make sure everything's working just as it should be, and let's see how that goes. After putting in enough bamboo, enough honeycombs, and enough bone meal, I can safely say this farm does in fact work, and now you have a dried kelp block farm. If you can think of any way to optimize this farm in any way, please let me know in the comments. I always love learning more about this game, and I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you will use this farm in your survival world because it's very effective at doing its job, and I'll see you guys again in my next video.